For over 1,000 years, the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire that outlasted the fall of Rome by nearly a millennium, was governed by the principle that imperial blood was sacred. The emperor was God's representative on earth, the Basileus Autocrator, the supreme sovereign of a civilization that regarded itself as the direct continuation of Rome, the guardian of Christian orthodoxy, and the most sophisticated political entity in the known world. The legitimacy of that ruler rested on a claim of lineage, on the idea that the bloodline of emperors was something qualitatively different from ordinary human ancestry. For an empire that endured from 330 CE to 1453 CE, the claim was tested repeatedly by usurpers, palace coups, blinding of rivals, and succession crises of extraordinary complexity. And when modern historians combined what ancient DNA research has revealed about Byzantine imperial populations with the historical and genetic record of the dynasty that ruled Byzantium at its absolute peak, its so-called Golden Age, a picture emerged that the empire's own court historians spent generations trying to obscure. One of the most celebrated dynasties in Byzantine history may have been founded on a bloodline that was never royal at all. The Byzantine Empire produced approximately 90 rulers across its 11 centuries of existence. It was governed by dynasties that rose, consolidated power, declined, were overthrown, and were replaced with a regularity that would have seemed chaotic from the outside, but that followed internal political logic shaped by the specific mechanisms of Byzantine succession, which had no fixed rules of primogeniture, allowed for co-emperors, and tolerated the elevation of men of non-aristocratic background to the throne provided they could seize and hold it. This produced an imperial history unlike that of any other major medieval state. In Western Europe, dynasties were defined by hereditary blood claims that could be traced and legally contested. In Byzantium, the right to rule was demonstrated primarily by actually ruling, but the legitimacy of that rule was always framed in terms of divine selection and, where possible, blood connection to previous emperors. The tension between these two principles, effective power and legitimate lineage, is the fault line that runs through the entire history of the empire. And nowhere does it crack more dramatically than in the story of the Macedonian dynasty. Like and subscribe, because the Macedonian dynasty ruled Byzantium during its most celebrated Golden Age, and the man who founded it was a peasant who murdered his way to the throne, and whose most famous son may not have been his son at all. Basil I, known to history as Basil the Macedonian, was born sometime between 809 and 835 CE in the Byzantine theme of Macedonia, a provincial administrative district in what is now Bulgaria and northern Greece. He came from a peasant family that had settled in Macedonia, perhaps of Armenian origin. He was not educated in the imperial court. He held no military rank. He owned no land. By every measure of Byzantine social hierarchy, he was as far from the throne as a person could be while still living within the empire's borders. What he had was physical presence. He was reportedly an exceptionally powerful and handsome man, and an instinct for navigating patronage networks that would eventually place him at the center of Byzantine power. He moved to Constantinople to make his fortune, caught the attention of the Emperor Michael III, and rose from groom to co-emperor through a combination of imperial favor, political maneuvering, and ultimately murder. The sequence of events by which Basil reached the purple is one of the most dramatic in the entire history of Byzantine court politics. Michael III, known to his enemies as Michael the Drunkard, was the reigning emperor of the Amorian dynasty, a dissolute ruler whose reign was characterized more by court intrigue than effective governance. He brought Basil into his household as a personal attendant, elevated him through a series of ranks, and eventually made him co-emperor in 866 CE. The relationship between the two men was intimate and politically complex in ways that Byzantine sources describe with varying degrees of candor. Then, in September 867 CE, Basil arranged the assassination of Michael III and declared himself sole emperor. When he outrageously killed his benefactor and emperor Michael III, he became the supreme ruler in Constantinople and oversaw what would become a golden period in Byzantine history. The dynasty Basil founded, the Macedonian dynasty, would rule Byzantium for nearly 2 centuries, from 867 to 1056 CE, and the period of its dominance is widely regarded as the Byzantine Empire's cultural, military, and political zenith. Like and subscribe, because what happened immediately before Basil's assassination of Michael III created a dynastic time bomb whose implications historians are still debating more than 11 centuries later. Basil divorced his wife Maria and married Eudokia Ingarina, Michael's favorite mistress, around 865 CE. That arrangement, a reigning emperor ordering his newly elevated co-emperor to marry the emperor's own mistress, is unusual by any standard. Byzantine sources are not subtle about implying that Michael remained sexually involved with Eudokia after the marriage. The arrangement may have been designed to give any children. Eudokia bore a formal father in Basil while keeping Michael as their biological father, a way of securing the imperial bloodline while managing the political optics of an emperor's mistress, giving birth to potential heirs. It was commonly believed in Byzantine circles that Leo VI, Basil's successor and reputed son, was really the son of Michael III. Leo VI, who ruled from 886 to 912 CE, and is known to history as Leo the Wise for his prolific legal and theological writings, was born in 866 CE, while Basil was co-emperor, but Michael III was still alive, and, according to Byzantine court gossip, still intimately connected to Eudokia. Leo was either the illegitimate son of Emperor Michael III or the second son of Michael's successor, Basil I, with Eudokia being both Michael's mistress and Basil's wife simultaneously. Basil himself, according to multiple Byzantine sources, believed Leo was not his biological son and hated the boy with a bitterness that was visible enough to become a matter of record. Basil was unsure of the parentage of his second son Leo, and even went so far as to have his third son Stephen castrated, a punishment that barred Stephen permanently from the imperial succession. While his uncertainty about Leo's paternity was evident in the numismatic and sigillographic record of his reign, the coins and imperial seals of the period, which typically featured the emperor alongside his co-emperors and designated heirs, show a striking pattern. Basil's eldest son Constantine was prominently featured from the beginning of the reign, while Leo and his younger brother Alexander were excluded from all but minor denominations for extended periods, reflecting Basil's documented reluctance to formally acknowledge Leo as a legitimate heir. Constantine, Basil's eldest son and clearly his favored legitimate heir, died in 879 CE, a death that devastated Basil and left the succession in exactly the uncertain state that his tangled domestic arrangements had created. Without Constantine, the throne accident during a hunting trip, he was dragged by a deer for 16 miles, an end that contemporary accounts treated with barely concealed suspicion given Leo's subsequent inheritance of power. It was Leo who succeeded Basil the Warmer, became the second ruler of the Macedonian dynasty. Leo then succeeded Basil, and it was Leo's son Constantine who provided the eventual legitimate heir of the dynasty that Basil had founded, through a succession complicated by Leo's own inability to produce a legitimate male heir through his first 3 marriages. Like and subscribe. Because the paternity question at the heart of the Macedonian dynasty is not merely a historical scandal, it is a question about whether the bloodline that ruled Byzantium at the height of its power was actually the bloodline of the dynasty that claimed it. If Leo VI was indeed the biological son of Michael III rather than of Basil I, then the succession picture of the Macedonian dynasty looks dramatically different from what Byzantine court historians presented. Basil the Warmer founded the dynasty as the first ruler. If Leo was not Basil's son, then Leo represented not the continuation of Basil's bloodline, but the continuation of Michael III's bloodline, the Amorian dynasty that Basil had murdered and supposedly replaced. In that scenario, what Byzantine historians call the Macedonian dynasty would actually be, from Leo VI onward, a continuation of the Amorian bloodline that the dynasty's supposed founder had violently ended. The peasant usurper who murdered his way to the throne would have been followed not by his own biological heirs, but by the surviving genetic legacy of the man he killed. And the greatest figures of the Macedonian Golden Age, Constantine VII, Porphyrogenitus, Nikephoros II, Phokas, John Zimisces, Basil II, Bulgaroctonos, would have carried not the blood of the Macedonian peasant who seized the throne, but the blood of the drunken Amorian emperor who was supposedly archaeological remains, and 131 ancient genomes from 100 BCE to 1636 CE now reveal the Byzantine Empire's layered population history across Turkey, the Balkans, Italy, and the Levant. While this broad genetic dataset illuminates the demographic structure of the Byzantine world and confirms the patterns of population, mixture, mobility, and continuity that shaped the empire's multi-ethnic character, it does not, and with current technology cannot, directly resolve the Leo VI paternity question, because no confirmed skeletal remains of Michael III or Basil I have been identified and genotyped. The question remains where it has been for 11 centuries, in the realm of historical inference, circumstantial evidence, and the explicit testimony of Byzantine sources that lean in different directions depending on their political affiliation and the era in which they were writing. What genetic science has contributed to understanding the Byzantine imperial world more broadly is the picture of what the empire actually looked like in population terms. And that picture is itself a significant revision of simplified narratives about Byzantine ethnic identity. Mitochondrial analysis of Byzantine populations has revealed the differential impact of multiple historical events in South Anatolia across the Byzantine period. The Byzantine Empire was not an ethnically homogeneous state. Its emperors came from Greek, Thracian, Armenian, Illyrian, and even Slavic backgrounds. Basil of Furs himself was almost certainly of Armenian ethnic origin. His family had settled in Macedonia from what was likely an Armenian background, which makes the naming of his dynasty after a geographical region rather than a family name somewhat ironic. The Macedonian dynasty was founded by a man who was probably not ethnically Macedonian, whose peasant origins were systematically concealed by court historians who invented aristocratic genealogies to legitimize the dynasty retroactively, and whose most celebrated successor may not have been his biological son. Like and subscribe, because the retroactive genealogy that Byzantine court historians invented for Basil the Firm is one of the most elaborate exercises in historical fabrication in medieval historiography. Byzantine historians, including Basil's own grandson, Constantine VII Porphyrogenitos, expended considerable effort whitewashing Basil's bloody path to the throne. Constantine VII, the very ruler whose epithet Porphyrogenitos means born in the purple, indicating legitimate imperial birth, was himself born to Leo VI's mistress, Zoe Carbonopsina, in 905 CE, before Leo contracted his fourth marriage to make Constantine legitimate. The legitimacy of the Macedonian dynasty's most prolific and intellectually accomplished emperor was thus itself complicated by the circumstances of his birth. Constantine VII devoted considerable imperial resources to commissioning texts that placed Basil III's origins in a carefully constructed aristocratic context. Claims that Basil descended from the Arsacid kings of Armenia, the ancient Parthian royal family. Claims that modern historians consider fabrications designed to provide the dynasty's peasant founder with the blue blood the imperial office demanded. The genetic and historical record together reveal a dynasty built on three successive layers of illegitimacy. A peasant founder who murdered his predecessor, a possible biological heir of that murdered predecessor ruling as the dynasty's second emperor, and a third-generation ruler born out of wedlock whose own grandson commissioned flattering fictions to obscure the foundation of everything that preceded him. The Macedonian dynasty's historical accomplishments were nonetheless genuine and substantial. The Macedonian period is regarded as the golden age of the Byzantine Empire, a time of cultural renaissance, military expansion, legal codification, and political consolidation that brought the empire to its greatest power since Justinian. The reconquest of Crete and Cyprus, the campaigns that extended Byzantine territory deep into Armenia and Syria, the legal code that systematized Roman law into the Basilica, the artistic and intellectual flourishing of the Macedonian Renaissance. All of these were real achievements of the dynasty and its emperors, achievements that would define Byzantium's reputation for centuries after the dynasty itself ended. Whether the later Macedonian emperors carried the blood of Basil the Firm or of Michael III does not change the historical reality of what was accomplished under their rule. But it does change what that rule represented. Not the fulfillment of a peasant's improbable dynasty, but the survival and continuation of an older imperial bloodline wearing new dynastic clothing, governed by a court that invested enormous intellectual energy in constructing a genealogical fiction that everyone in the inner circle probably knew, at some level, to be false. The question of Leo VI's paternity will likely never be definitively resolved without confirmed skeletal material from the relevant individuals and the application of ancient DNA sequencing to compare their Y-chromosome profiles. That evidence does not currently exist. What does exist is the historical record, the Byzantine sources that contradict each, other about Leo's parentage, the numismatic evidence that reflects Basil's documented doubts, the logic of the dynastic arrangement that placed Eudokia simultaneously in the beds of both the reigning emperor and his co-emperor, and the genetic reality that the entire subsequent Macedonian bloodline flowed through Leo rather than through Basil's other sons. History's most celebrated Byzantine dynasty may have been, from its second generation onward, the dynasty of the man its founder murdered. An irony so complete that only the Byzantine Empire, with its characteristic combination of theological certainty and political ruthlessness, could have produced it, and then spent 2 centuries pretending it had not happened. The broader picture of Byzantine imperial succession, beyond the Macedonian dynasty, adds important context to what makes the Leo VI paternity question so historically charged. Byzantine emperors were deposed, blinded, exiled, murdered, and replaced with a frequency that made the concept of an unbroken royal bloodline more aspiration than reality across the empire's 11 centuries. The Justinianic dynasty gave way to a period of military emperors in the 7th century. The Heraclian dynasty was followed by the chaos of the 20 Years' Anarchy. The Isaurian dynasty was replaced by the Amorian dynasty, which was in turn replaced by Basil's Macedonian dynasty, or rather, if Leo VI was Michael III's son, replaced by a continuation of the Amorian bloodline under a new dynastic name. After the Macedonian dynasty ended in 1056 CE with the death of Empress Theodora without an heir, the empire went through the Ducas, Komnenos, Angelos, and finally Palaiologos dynasties before the fall of Constantinople in 1453. The Komnenian dynasty produced emperors who governed from Constantinople for over a century and whose family relationships became so elaborate that their descendants filled senior positions across the Byzantine court for generations. The Palaiologos dynasty lasted nearly 2 centuries, with Michael VIII's recapture of Constantinople from the Latin Empire in 1261 and Constantine V's final defense of it against Mehmed II in 1453. What runs through all of these dynasties, and what the Leo VI question illuminates in particularly sharp focus, is the recurring Byzantine problem of balancing the practical reality of how power was acquired against the theological and political necessity of presenting that power as legitimate and divinely ordained. Byzantine historians expended considerable literary effort whitewashing the paths of emperors to the throne, constructing genealogical claims that linked usurpers to previous dynasties, inventing noble ancestors for peasant founders, and providing theological frameworks that interpreted even the most violent usurpations as expressions of divine will. The fabricated genealogy of Basil Umfur, the Armenian peasant, given our Sassanid royal ancestors by his own grandson, is the most elaborate example of this tendency, but it is not unique. It is the expression of a political culture in which legitimacy was something to be constructed after the fact, as much as inherited from the past. Like and subscribe. Because the DNA evidence that does exist for Byzantine populations reveals the empire's true character as a multi-ethnic, multi-ancestral civilization that was genuinely different from the ethnically homogeneous state that some nationalist historiography of later centuries tried to make it. Material culture and ancient DNA together trace local continuity, mobility, and Near Eastern European admixture across the Byzantine imperial, territories from 100 BCE through 1636 CE. The Byzantine Empire was a state defined by its religion, its Roman legal tradition, and its Greek language, not by ethnic homogeneity. Its population included people of Greek, Armenian, Syrian, Egyptian, Slavic, Bulgarian, and Frankish ancestry, among others. Its emperors reflected that diversity. Armenian peasants from Macedonia, Cappadocian Greeks, Thracians, who spoke Greek as their second language, rulers with partial Frankish ancestry from the Crusader period, and the multi-ethnic Palaiologos dynasty whose founder Michael VIII carried the blood of Ducas, Komnenos, Angelos, and Palaiologos family lines simultaneously. The genetic history of the Byzantine ruling class mirrors the genetic history of the empire itself, a continuous process of mixture, adaptation, and cultural integration that produced something genuinely new while claiming continuity with what had come before. The scientific question that ancient DNA cannot yet fully answer, who was Leo VI's biological father, may eventually become answerable if confirmed skeletal material from the relevant individuals is identified and subjected to modern sequencing. The Church of the Holy Apostles in Constantinople, where multiple Byzantine emperors were buried, was destroyed after the Ottoman conquest. The monastery of the Pantocrator, which served as the burial place for later Byzantine rulers, survives as the Zeyrek Mosque in Istanbul. Ongoing archaeological work in Istanbul and across former Byzantine territories continues to identify and analyze human remains from the imperial period. The day may come when Y-chromosome data from individuals securely identified as Michael III and Basil Orm can be compared against remains identified as Leo VI, and the paternity question that Byzantine court historians spent 2 centuries maneuvering around can be answered with the same directness that ancient DNA brought to the Minoan, Etruscan, and Scythian origin debates. Until that day, the question stands exactly where it has stood for 11 centuries, unresolved, historically significant, and at the center of the most accomplished and celebrated dynasty in the 1,000-year history of the Byzantine Empire.